I appreciate your being here. I'm Bonnie McEwen with the State Library of Iowa, and we hope to also welcome Amanda Vasquez from the Orange City Public Library. She hasn't logged in yet, but at least I don't see her in the roster yet, but we hope she'll be here shortly. Amanda is the director at the Orange City Public Library, and lucky for us, Amanda is the one with firsthand experience in using Project Outcome, which we'll definitely talk more about this evening. Well, this is yet another installment in the Boardroom webinar series. Each time we're likely to have different people joining us, so each time I include this slide showing these two publications from the State Library. The trustee's handbook there is about 4.5 years old now, and I am on a team of people who are tasked with doing an update to the trustee's handbook. We are eyeballing 2019 for a new version of that to come out. But for now, what you see here on screen is the edition that's currently in play. And then on the right you see the newest edition of Public Library Standards. That is now 2 years old already. Good grief, you guys, time flies. The 2016 edition of Standards came out in July, 2 years ago. So we are always making references to both of these publications in this and other webinars. Just know that you can find these booklets in their entirety on the State Library's website at the addresses you see there at the bottom of the slide. So tonight, it's all about outcomes-based evaluation. If you joined the boardroom last month in June, the topic was strategic planning. Becky Heil and I, Becky is the consultant with the Southeast District. She's over in Dubuque, so we're an entire state apart, she and I, but we do a lot of classes together. And last month, Becky and I stepped through all of those pieces that need to be evident in your planning document, from community input to a new mission statement to goals and objectives, but also some indication of how you hope to evaluate your plan. So in tonight's edition of the boardroom, Amanda and I wanted to zero in on that evaluation piece, especially looking at outcomes, which is probably not as commonly measured. But not to worry, we'll define those terms you see on the screen, inputs, outputs, and outcomes. We will define all of those in a little bit. So here you can see where we're headed. Plus I have some articles and some websites to share with you at the end. So the first term we need to define probably is outcome, since that's the title of the webinar tonight. While I'm sure the term itself is familiar, it might be more likely that the practice of gathering outcome data is not done nearly as often in libraries. No doubt you've heard the term. But it will be interesting for me to know how many of your libraries have dabbled or maybe more than dabbled in gathering these outcome-based stories. You see a good quote here from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We call it IMLS for short. This is a federal agency. At the State Library, we know this best as the agency from whence comes our share of federal funding into our operating budget. So this is a pretty important agency for us. IMLS, along with scores of other state and national programs, tells us that evaluating for outcomes has become increasingly important, especially for services that are funded with local, state, and federal tax dollars. So these are really important questions to consider. Questions like, what difference does your local library make to your users and to your community at large? What benefits are people experiencing? The definition here very much underscores benefits. When you start to gather outcome data, you're looking for positive changes in people's skills, knowledge, attitude, behavior, and maybe their life condition or their life status. So those are important questions, and gathering outcomes, we think, helps answer those questions. Measuring outcomes is very much on the scene these days. It's talked about and encouraged by funding bodies. Grant sources, too, like to use these things and like to see evidence of outcomes in the grants that you might be writing. But evaluating the library's plan of service is also a board responsibility. Certainly entering into a long-range planning process is very much something that library boards are tasked to do. If you joined us last month, we talked about that standard that calls for Iowa libraries to enter into strategic planning and to have a long-range planning document at the end of a process required at a Tier 2 level. So planning is definitely a board responsibility, so it follows then that evaluating your plan, evaluating your library service and its programming kind of follows suit. We feel also that outcomes and the information you're able to start gathering from looking more closely at outcomes presents the library service in more meaningful ways. The outcomes you collect should become the stories you tell. So look at the third bullet point here. This really kind of confirms, outcomes will confirm what we know instinctively to be true, but what we often fail to talk about. These are documented differences that library service makes in people's life. It's the impact that library service has on people. And definitely, this will help demonstrate accountability and credibility. You know, I said just a little bit ago that outcomes data is often urged for those of us who receive state or federal or local funding. In the case of Iowa's public libraries, you're funding from cities and counties. The library is a city service and supported by city and county tax dollars. The state library is a state service supported by state and federal dollars. So how is your city library making the most of its funding? How is it showing itself to be a good civic partner? How is it moving forward with technology, with fresh approaches to programming? Your planning document is a good place to find evidence of that, and it's a good place to start talking about what the library does for the community and what it hopes to achieve. So outcomes will help you kind of even enlarge those stories a bit. And of course, there's always a connection to standards. No surprise there, right? I want to bring back the slide that we looked at last time from standards. This is the standard number 17, required at a Tier 1 level. This is the one I referenced that says the library needs to have a written plan. So there you can see those points that need to be addressed. Evidence of the library's response to community needs, a fresh mission statement, goals and objectives, and there you see this little nugget here, an evaluation of the library's progress toward meeting the plan's goals and objectives. So I also wanted to show you these two standards that I think are certainly specific to library program and community relations. They come within that section of the standards document. But I think they can kind of lead us to a natural connection to evaluation. Standard 66 also required, or 68, excuse me, also required at a Tier 2 level, says that the library provides programming for its users or cooperates with other agencies to provide programming. So it's not like the library has to go it alone. You can certainly look for those partners in your community that have a common interest with you and who might want to be trying to address some of the same community needs. I think a neat outcome-based question for your partners, if you find your library doing a lot with working in collaboration with other city community organizations or agencies, a neat question to ask there would be, what's the impact of having the library in on that action? What's the impact to your community theater? What's the impact to your local arts center? What's the impact to your K-12 school system for having the library in on the action as their civic partner? I think libraries are wonderful community partners, and I think this standard helps to underscore that you don't need to think that all of this programming and service needs to fall squarely on the library's shoulders. I think there's a great ability for libraries and a great opportunity for libraries to find those partnerships. And then look at standard number 70. This also required at a Tier 2 level. Standard 70 calls for the library to develop community relations through lots of different forms of communication and through communicating with elected officials, with business leaders, with those other groups and organizations that I mentioned. This standard number 70, I think, just has a really strong connection to not only to evaluation, but to bringing in these outcome-based stories that you can use in these very communications, in these very kinds of meetings and presentations that you are finding yourself doing with the City Council, for instance. This standard goes on to say, it's not all printed here, but you'll find it in its entirety in the document itself. This standard goes on to say that some of these communication methods can be to attend City Council meetings other than at budget time, which is an interesting angle. The standard suggests that you could give presentations to community groups and organizations. So I love to suggest to library trustees that they get themselves on the speaking circuit. If you yourselves as trustees are members of community groups like the Lions, the Rotary group, the Kiwanis group, it would be great if you wanted to kind of step into that and offer some presentations about the public library from your perspective as a board member. And how cool to be able to use some of this outcome data, to have that in hand and to take that with you. That would be an especially powerful, I think, part of any presentation that we give, directors, staff, or board members, to our funding bodies or to our other partners out there. All right, well, let me get that out of the way for a second. So if you've joined the boardroom before, then you've seen this business calendar before. It's something I use quite routinely. It's a way to use a year-at-a-glance calendar to kind of eyeball certain months for those annual discussions. There are things that you'll take up in your board business that are yearly discussions, right? As you can see my example here, you might spend a month or two or maybe more looking at reviewing policies. You might want to designate a month when you do the director's job evaluation. Typically in October or November of the year is the time when you're prepping the budget. So for me, I think looking at December as a time to review your strategic plan seems like a good month for that. January would be good too. It protects a month for this and other aspects of your board business, but putting your strategic plan evaluation on this year-at-a-glance calendar kind of helps you review the progress you've made to see what was accomplished and what you'd like to move forward into the coming year. I want to show you next a couple of paragraphs from the Ida Grove Public Library's planning document. This, I think, was so well done from start to finish. Ida Grove just put together a really wonderful document. And here is how they reflected their strategic plan evaluation. Ida Grove chooses to do this in January of the year. I've heard of boards that evaluate more often, like quarterly. I've heard of boards that look at it twice a year, like summer and winter. Whatever your schedule, when you submit that planning document, you'll need to have some evidence that you intend to evaluate your progress along the way. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because outcomes are not the only way to evaluate your plan. Certainly that's going to be our conversation focus tonight, but I don't want to suggest that you will stop gathering these other numbers. You're still going to need these other numbers. And let me just bring forward some of these other very common measurements. I'll just bring them all forward on the screen here. And we looked at this last time as well, or last month. You can see from this, I think, that measure 1 and measure 3 are probably the most familiar kinds of measurements you're keeping track of. They're familiar and they're really pretty easy too, so nothing wrong with that. You know, counting the number of people who come to your programming, the number of kids who came to your summer reading program, the numbers of people in your book discussion groups, the number who came to your last author visit, for instance. A very good number to gather. So is measure number 3, the total number of programs presented. Those are still solid numbers. In fact, these numbers of programs and numbers of people attending them, the head count, the door count that comes into your library, these are things that are asked for on the annual survey every year that you directors out there have the pleasure of doing around about every October. So Amanda and I aren't suggesting that you stop measuring these at all. But we would like to see more libraries move into doing more with measures 2 and measures 4, which really is getting at that, for measure 2, that level of satisfaction. How was the program received? And even more importantly is this measure 4, which directly speaks to outcomes. What difference or impact did the program make for those who attended? So these are testimonials and that really good evaluation data that really is perhaps more meaningful in many ways for the audiences that you'll be speaking to. So with that said, I want to pause as kind of like a preamble to the rest of our discussion about outcomes and project outcomes in particular.
So, like Bonnie said, we're going to be talking tonight about inputs, outputs, and outcomes, and especially how we can use Project Outcome, a tool available to us from the State Library, to evaluate all of those things in our own library. So first of all, for those of you who are familiar with inputs, we're going to be doing a little review. So inputs are basically anything that you put into a program or a service that you offer in your library. So these are resources that you have that you can use. So funding would be something that you have, so money that you have to spend on all kinds of other inputs, actually. The time that you have often will come from the staff that you have in your library every day doing all of the great things that they do for your community. Collections, I think that our cards and movies and fun things that we do would come under the collections that we have that are available to our patrons and for us to use. So collections, our technology, the space, the physical building that we have and the space that we have available to use, and any other special use spaces that we have. So these are the resources that we can use to provide services. So your staff, they provide a service of, working at the circulation desk and providing good customer service. They offer programs, they maintain your collections. The collections that you have, your patrons use them, but I know that your staff use them as well, whether they're doing story times or trying to connect a patron with material that's relevant to them. Your technology is available, so your public access computers, those are things available that your community can use. All of these are things that you have that you can use to do something else with. So if you're putting all of these things into the function machine, as Bonnie has put on this slide, so you're putting your staff and technology and meeting rooms in, what are you getting out through your library service? What we're getting are outputs. So outputs are basically the productivity. What is it that you have received or made or gotten in exchange for what you have offered in, what you have put into this kind of input-output equation? Yes, Laura, circulation. You use your collection to circulate materials. So outputs are how your resources are used, and these are countable things. Yes, library visits, that's another great example of an output. These are the kinds of things that you're going to find on your monthly reports, that you'll put on your monthly reports if you're a director, that you'll receive from your director if you are a library trustee, the kinds of things that we as directors report to the. So your door count, your circulation statistics, any of your in-library use statistics, how often your public computers and website are used, as well as your digital collections, your programming attendance, and meeting room use. These are all of the things, the numbers that you get in exchange for putting time and money and energy and your collection and technology and things into your library. So you have countable things like your budget money, staff hours, number of computers or tablets or whatever that you have, and then you use those to create something, whatever that something is, and you have an output that is also measurable in exchange for those things. So you go to city council and you say, we would like X number of dollars so we can have, X, Y, and Z staff and collections. And then you can come back to them and say, okay, with this money that you gave us last year, which allowed us to have these other inputs, we were able to provide this number of services. Now, inputs and outputs are generally pretty easy to measure. They're very accountable. They're numbers that you can see the use of, whether it's through reports or attendees at programs or the number of pages printed on your public machines. All of those things are outputs. What's a little more difficult to quantify, but really gets to the value of our services. Yeah, we know it's good to offer story time. We know it's good to offer public computers, but what is the actual value of offering those to our patrons? And that's where our outcomes come in. So this is a definition for an outcome from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So an outcome is the benefit to people. It is the positive changes in people's skills, knowledge, attitude, behavior, and condition or life status. So these can be kind of short-term or long-term things. So, for example, most or all of your libraries probably offer Learning Express, which is a set of courses and quizzes for patrons to use to learn new skills, whether it's for school as a primary or secondary student, college readiness, career skills, getting ready to take the GRE, all kinds of things like that. So the input that we have is that we have Learning Express. That's a resource that's available. you can go in and see the output from that, which is the number of times it has been used in a month. Those are great things, great for monthly and annual reports. But the outcome of using Learning Express, say for someone wanting to learn a skill for a new job, is they might learn that new skill. They might get information for a citizenship exam or improve their written language skills. Those are outcomes that you don't know just from the raw numbers. Another example might be if you are offering programs at your library. That's great. You know, your staff spent X number of hours, you spent X number of dollars, you used your meeting space for 2 hours. Those are all of your inputs. And you can see, okay, we had 10 people at this program. Awesome. But what you might not be able to see in those numbers is if you're doing a history program, that you've increased people's curiosity and feeling of belonging in the community that they live in. You might not know that when you offer a summer reading program on healthy snacks for teens, that now you have teens who are at home and making after school snacks instead of running out and buying a donut and a Mountain Dew. Those are positive life changes. You've taught them a skill and some knowledge, and it has potentially changed their attitudes or their behavior, which can have long-lasting impacts. Sometimes it can be easy in theory to understand inputs, outputs, and outcomes, and it can be a little harder in a real-life situation to kind of differentiate those things and figure out how they come in to the evaluation. Once you know what your inputs are, you can, or actually really before you know what your inputs are, you can decide what you want your, why you want to do whatever it is that you're doing. So why you want to do this program. Figure out what your standards for success are going to be, how much you're willing to invest, how much of your inputs you're willing to invest. You don't want to spend 40 staff hours getting ready for a teen smoothie program, but you might say, you know, staff can have 2 hours to work on this. Then you can decide, well, is this a successful program based on how many students attended? And then weigh all that against what your hopeful outcomes are or what you can observe in your environment and with your patrons after the fact. So again, an overview of the evening, and now we're going to move on to my library's experience utilizing Project Outcome. So Project Outcome is a wonderful, underlined wonderful product which is available for free to your library through the state. All that your library needs to do is go to this website, projectoutcome.org, and set up an account. And once you do that, you have access to 7 pre-designed surveys that can help you measure the effectiveness of your library services in the 7 key areas that are at the bottom of the screen. So those 7 areas are civic and community engagement, digital inclusion, early childhood literacy, economic development, education and lifelong learning, job skills, and your summer reading program. So like I said, they are 7 pre-designed surveys, and that comes in and is really important, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Next, we're going to look at just some information about more of those different service areas that are available. So the service areas, you know, civic and community engagement. I don't know if this is large enough on your screen to be able to read it, but it allows you to measure your services to inform, enrich, preserve, and promote community engagement, ranging from government issues to recreational activities. When it comes to economic development, it can allow you to evaluate your services to improve business startups and development skills. For job skills, it can let you evaluate your services to improve skills to help people find and apply for jobs and advance their own careers, like when you're offering programs on resume help or one-on-one resume help, job fairs, job search services, and other programs. So these are really big picture service areas that you are probably already doing in your library, and these can help you measure the effectiveness and the value of the programs that you're offering in your library. So the example that we're going to look at is the summer reading program evaluations that we did in our library, not this year, but so like I said, these are pre-designed surveys. So each survey that I have seen, and I think that all of this is true for all of them, each survey is 6 questions. And here are the 6 questions for 3 of these surveys that you can use. So these surveys are available to you. Once you've set up your account, you decide which service area you'd like to look at. You set up a survey with starting and ending dates. You add a little information about your library. And then you have access to this 6-question survey. You can either print off these surveys and have them available in the library, hand them out at programs. If you really wanted to, you could maybe send them out to your patrons. And these are available, I believe, in both English and in Spanish. They're also available online in a digital format. So you can take the link to this survey and throw it on your Facebook page with, hey, we're doing a survey, please help us out. That's sometimes a lot easier for people to just click through and answer 5 questions and quick type something in than having to remember when they're in the library and take a minute when they have places to be or kids to wrangle and get them to fill out a survey. It is very short. It's only 1 page, 6 questions, like I said. But having the online version is super helpful as well. So the first 4 questions on each of these surveys are questions that you answer with a rating system. So it's a 5-point rating system, with 1 being strongly disagree, and all the way up to 5, which is strongly agree. So the first 4 questions would you rate on that axis. And then the last 2 questions, 5 and 6, are open-ended questions where you can get some really excellent anecdotes and individual feedback from your patrons. So in terms of the job skills survey, your patrons would, if you are offering this to patrons who have just attended maybe a resume workshop or a speed interview type event, or even just getting some one-on-one help with a staff member, they would rate, do they feel more knowledgeable about the job search process? Do they agree? Do they disagree? And to what degree? Are they more confident? Do they feel more confident about the job search process? Do they agree that they will? Do they agree or disagree that they're going to use what they learned? And do they agree or disagree that they're more aware of the resources that are available to you at the library? And hopefully that question is always at least an agree, hopefully a strongly agree. But then after that, they can get into what it is that they liked most about their program and what could the library do to better assist them in their job search. So hopefully you get some good feedback about things that your staff or your collection or your program did really well to help that patron. But also you can get some really good ideas about what didn't work for that patron, or something that they wish they spent more time on, or some other aspect of the program that could be changed in a way to make that program more valuable to. Looking at the third one, the summer reading quiz, there are actually a couple versions of this quiz, and the questions are different based on who's being asked the questions. So these are the questions that you would ask a caregiver of a youth or a child who participated in the summer reading program. So they will be answering what their beliefs are for how effective the summer reading program was for their child. However, you also have the option to ask adults about how they felt about your adult summer reading program. And you can ask children and teens how they felt about the summer reading programs that were available to them. So there's a little bit of differentiation based on the audience that you're really trying to reach and who you're trying to garner feedback from. So this is an overview of some of our results from the summer reading program evaluation surveys that we did. This is an overview view. And what's really great about this is you can see how your library has performed just kind of in a vacuum. So all of these are in the 4.2 to 4.5 area, which means that it's on the higher end of agree, getting pretty close to strongly agree on whether the participants have gained extra knowledge or confidence, or whether they're going to apply new skills, and how aware they are of resources. So I would say that based on this agree, strongly agree, we were pretty successful. So like Bonnie's pointing for us, our adults rated our summer reading program overall. The average score was a 4.2. What's really nice about this is that you can compare your results to other results from both your state or province and the national average. So under our 4.2 that Bonnie is pointing at, you can see that, one, this is based on 36 survey responses, which out of about 95 to 100 adult participants in our summer reading program is a really great return. But also you can see that we are right on average for both the state of Iowa and the national average on how patrons are responding, or survey respondents are responding to our summer reading program. Now 36 out of 95 is really great for us, but I guess your mileage may vary. And there is later on, there's some resources, and one of those has to do with sample size. And I guess when I read it today, it basically said, there's no magic number for sample size. It really is just dependent on your population, your participants, but moral of the story is more is better. More survey participants means better data, that it could be more easily demonstrated to be representative of your population. This year we had just under 900 total participants in our summer reading program. So for the adults, we had really good response. But yeah, definitely not numbers to scoff at for our other returns. But I have to say, we were offering Amazon gift cards. So, I mean, we kind of used a little bit of incentive, just like we all do for summer reading, right? Read this many minutes or this many pages and come and get your prize. We did give away 1 or 2 different gift cards based on who had filled out our survey. So they had a little extra incentive. Comment and suggestion boxes are good. I do think that it's really hard to get information from those, because you're just going to hear, like, one of the comments I will never probably forget is someone sent an anonymous note into our comment box saying we needed to turn the air conditioner up higher so it was colder in the library. I mean, that's not, it's important to that one patron. It's maybe not the kind of feedback that we need when we're sitting in the back freezing our buns off. But the nice thing about doing a survey is, it has an end on it. And you can say, okay, 2 weeks, we're going to push really hard, get as many people to do our survey responses as we possibly can, and that's just going to have to be good enough. And so there's kind of an incentive to just push really hard instead of just saying, well, you can always put something in the comment box, or trying to get some passive participation. It is a little more active, but you do get really great usable data from it. So on the previous slide, what we were able to see were composite numbers. So, for our summer reading adult, which is also shown here on the top bars, we got a composite score of 4.2. But looking at this detail view can give us a much better idea of how our patrons are distributed. So some things that are kind of stand out to me when I'm looking at this data is that the second question, we're asking patrons if they enjoy reading more than they did before participating in the summer reading program. Strongly agree is only about 34% of people. Agree is about 43%, but 20% of people said that they don't really agree or disagree, which honestly is not that surprising to me. I kind of think that for most adults who are participating in the summer reading program, unless it's a parent that we happen to catch by telling them, hey, if you're reading to your kids, mark it on your own reading log. for most people and adults who are participating, they're probably already readers. And this isn't going to be a huge event that kind of shapes their view of libraries and of reading in general. So I would assume that in terms of children or parents' perceptions of their children, those numbers might be a little bit different, but I'm not terribly surprised by the kind of large portion of the community that are the respondents that say it didn't really have a huge effect on their appreciation of reading, or that they enjoy reading any more than they did before. Another one that I thought was really a standout is that final one at the bottom of the screen. You know, based on their participation in the summer reading program here, 66% plus 32%, what is that? 98% of our respondents said that they agree or strongly agree that their child uses the library more often. Like, that is that's an excellent response. And what's really great about this is you can take this number to your stakeholders. So we could say, we did some surveys during summer reading, you know, go to city council or your Kiwanis group or whoever it is that you're trying to get money from or keep them happy. And you can say, based on this survey that we did, 98% of our respondents said that the summer reading program resulted in their child using the library more. And that's going to translate to, if you have the data to back this up, you know, more, so it's going to affect your door count, hopefully. It will hopefully affect your circulations. If those kids are coming into the library and checking out books, it could result in more program attendance. So you can show that there was this really positive reaction to your summer reading program in terms of how that translates into visits to the library. And so those can be really great numbers to, you know, you can't share all of these numbers with all of your stakeholders, you just can't, but to pull out the really star numbers to influence the opinions of your stakeholders on the services that you're offering. So if you have a really great anecdote out of these, or you have a really great number from, you know, a resume workshop, or a teach local business owners how to better run their Facebook pages, you know, whatever it is that you're doing, if you do a survey and you get a really great number, hold on to it, include it in your annual reports to your city, include it into any kind of relevant publication that you do, to show that it's not just you tooting your own horn. You've gone and solicited this information from your community, and they had a really positive response. I guess I will say, one thing I will say is, when you do the paper-based surveys, you have to input all of that data. You need staff and staff time to do all of that. But it's time consuming, but I think it's worth it, being able to offer both options, so that those who are, you know, a little more tech savvy or use their phones or their laptops or whatever all the time and have a few minutes here or there, compared to people who might be sitting and reading a newspaper, you can bring a survey over to them and ask them, hey, would you fill out our survey and give us a little bit of insight into your use of the library?
Amanda, I once heard from a library, and I will never be able to remember which one, but I remember this story about a library who did a pretty significant adult program, bringing in an author to speak. And they had a great crowd, and anticipating this kind of a crowd, they had some of their friends group members on hand, and some of the staff on hand, to have some tablets fired up with their project outcome surveys ready to go, so that people could actually fill out the survey really quickly using a tablet or an iPad or whatever it was, whatever device they were using. Have you heard of that? I wish I knew what library where I heard that story from. But have you had experience with that, or how do you think that would work? You would need a tech savvy friends group, right?
I think that's an excellent idea. It's a really good way to get your friends group, or your board members, your board trustees, and your staff kind of involved in a program and getting face-to-face with some of your community members. It means you're getting responses like live in the moment when people are leaving and have the experience really fresh in their minds, instead of saying, you know, oh, hey, last week we saw that you attended this program. Would you fill out a survey? You know, they might have cooled a little bit, not particularly negatively. It's just the emotion of whether it was really good or, you know, hopefully not, but really bad. So doing surveys in the moment would be really great. Some other non-project outcome type surveys that I've heard of were also very similar. So just having a staff member with a tablet by your front door, you know, asking a 2-question survey. They just tap 2 buttons. So, you know, maybe it might be something as simple as, you know, were you happy with your customer service that you received today? And, you know, did you find the material or resource that you were looking for? And if either of them are no, maybe invite them to, you know, interact with that patron a little bit and ask, okay, what could we have done? But, you know, to get just a couple thumbs up, you know, it can be really easy, really quick. Another thing about project outcome that I didn't mention, because we've focused a lot on the summer reading type program, but would be useful for other programs like, say, your job skills or lifelong learning types of things. You can do, or actually what we did use this. We used this before when we did a survey of the early childhood literacy offerings that we did. And what we actually did is we took these 6 questions and then we added a bunch of other questions. So I don't necessarily recommend it just because it got a little bit long, but there were a lot of things that we were trying to figure out. We were trying to evaluate like the time and day that we were offering programs, and we weren't going to do 2 separate early literacy program surveys. So we kind of tacked those on at the end and then took the first 6 questions and dumped those into project outcome to get all of their great analysis. But then we still had all the anecdotal information and other questions. But you can either do, for some of these service areas, you can either do surveys immediately at the end of a program. So before they leave, before they walk out the door, you know, what did you think? How was it? What did you learn? But you can also do there's also another version of the survey for some of the service areas that's for a little bit down the road. So it might be a week later, a month later, 3 months later, to go back to those same patrons. And that will help you measure outcomes, yes, but even beyond that, something we didn't really talk about tonight, but kind of the long-term impact. So like we talked about with outcomes being, you know, a change in behavior or attitude, you can see longer down the line, okay, so they showed initial, you know, excitement about this idea or about this skill that they just earned and just learned about right after the fact. But, you know, how do they feel about it 3 months down the road? And so you can see how that's translating, because, you know, hopefully patrons who are leading your programs have a lot of warm fuzzies and give you really good feedback. Hopefully still true feedback, not just all warm fuzzies, but hopefully you get really good feedback in the moment. But then for patrons to have to think back on what it is that they learned and whether what they thought they were going to do is actually what they did do. So some of the service areas do have 2 versions for immediately after a program or service and a little bit down the line. I can't think of exactly what it's called, but it's pretty clear when you're setting up a survey which one you're asking for. So if you're doing something like maybe a job fair or a resume writing workshop, it would be really interesting and valuable to say, okay, at the end, you know, after this 2-hour workshop or job fair or whatever, okay, can we get your feedback now? But then to go back 3 months later and say, okay, did you get a new job? You know, do you feel more confident? Have you gotten more interviews? You know, those are really valuable statistics and anecdotes and data points for you to have to share with stakeholders. You know, you can go and say, yeah, we had 20 people at this job fair, and that's, you know, great. But if you can then go and say, and we checked back 3 months later, and 2 of those 20 people were in new jobs after attending our job fair, like that is important. That's huge, really impactful work that you can do at your library that you might not know about if you don't try and really take the action step of going and soliciting that information from your users.
Yeah, that really speaks to that last point in that quote from IMLS. That's the change in someone's life status, right? That is those have to be really wonderful stories to be able to tell. Amanda, I Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your experience there at Orange City. And those of you who have used this too, we're really glad to hear your testimonials about project outcome. It's really pretty easy to work your way through. I think with most of these, products, just the setting up your account and getting going is that first, the first hurdle to get through. But then when you get goofing around with it, um, you'll be hooked. You really will. This page also from Project Outcomes takes you to some really good tutorial videos. I mean, maybe that's where you want to get started. It's a logical place to start, certainly. Amanda referenced that Project Outcome also provides you with really good tips for writing open-ended survey questions. I'm I've always been of the opinion that I think surveys are better if they're shorter and if you keep those open-ended questions to a minimum, um, especially if you're going to hand out a printed survey to people. Um, then you've got the work of dealing with the commentary that comes from open-ended questions. So it's a little bit trickier to deal with, I think. So I'd keep it to a minimum, but certainly check out this resource page from Project Outcomes. Some very nice tip sheets for writing those kinds of questions, some really nice case studies, and Amanda mentioned, I think you mentioned something about sample size. That's a very frequent question we get at the State Library. How many responses make this thing valid? And I was glad to hear what you said. There's no really magic bullet for this. Is there in your experience? The more the better, right?
There just isn't. And I mean, Project Outcome is really great because it is useful to those of us who are not statisticians, who don't run numbers and compare data sets all day long, and we get really great responses and visual representations of those responses in the reports that can be generated. But yeah, it's hard to know. I think that you just kind of have to have a feel for your community and how far you can take the results. If one person comes in and has some really great feedback or some really negative feedback, and you have 4 or 5 that are just kind of middle of the road, but the feedback that you get from that one is just kind of way out of line for what you would have expected, take it with a grain of salt. A quote that I just saw today was, the multiple of anecdote is not data. So just because you have one or even a couple doesn't necessarily mean that it's really meaningful and that you need to do anything with that. But it's good for you to still be in tune with the opinions of your patrons.
Oh, right, and I think, as we showed on the slides, just the reports, the charts and graphs, and the very colorful visual displays of the data is just a bonus by participating in Project Outcome. I mean, I have to think that any city council member or county supervisor, I'll start there, would look at this and think, well, how about that public library? This is very impressive, right? Yeah, I think that's such a bonus. It almost looks like an infographic, kind of, which it's kind of the trendy new way to present data. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your experience there at Orange City. We have a couple of resources that we want to connect you with. This is one of them. This is a book from the American Library Association. It came out in 2016. It's only $36, so not terribly expensive, and you can order it online from the ALA store. The State Library, I believe, also has this in our collection, so if you wanted to interlibrary loan it to just learn a little bit more about this concept of outcome-based evaluation, you could borrow it first. and then buy your copy later. This outcome-based evaluation, this is a pretty major focus for us at the State Library as well. This is all over the State Library's strategic plan. So no wonder that we've included this in the Boardroom series. This is a very good article that was published in the magazine Public Libraries in November and December of 2017. It sets up, I think, 5 case studies, as I remember. I just want to read you something. Let me just park it right here while I read you something, a quote from this article that I thought was so good, and it speaks directly to library board members. The quote says this, and it comes from a library that has done a lot with Project Outcome and in sharing their results with their board. This library director writes this. This is the quote. I think reporting on outcomes really transformed conversations with our board. They are much more interested. It lets us tell a more complete story about the library and what we're offering. This person goes on to say, when you talk strictly in numbers, or those outputs, it's not something that people can hold on to as readily. But when you start talking about outcomes and the impact that a library is having, that's the true heart of what we're doing. And our board feels that it allows them to have something more concrete to hold on to and something more to talk to people about in terms of what the library does. It helps our board talk about the library in a more complete way. I love that. I love that quote because it so directly brings our library trustees into focus. So I would encourage you to take a look at
what you get is more than just the raw data to share with your stakeholders. They also have a couple of sections attached to your principal report, which includes an overview of just kind of, really great, really positive library sentiment for your stakeholders, some information about the surveys, but also implications for the community. So I actually pulled up the summer reading one that we had before, and one of the bullet points, I'm just going to read, it's pretty short, but summer reading programs improve more than reading skills in the Dominican University study, which they had referenced in a bullet point above. Teachers report that children who participate in summer reading programs return to school with a more positive attitude about reading and higher level of confidence in the classroom, read beyond what is required, and perceive reading as important. So Project Outcome has also gone out kind of into the research and found support in the research from these long-term studies. So this Dominican University's graduate school study that they did, it was a 3-year study that they did. And so they have what has been published and statistically sound information that is applicable in your situation. So you don't have to, if you don't have a great anecdote, you can go and really pull out one of these implications that they have noted for you, and pick that as your highlight, and talk about how summer reading is great and we had great response here, but we're looking beyond that. And so based on this other research other people have done that's really sound, these are the positive implications of what we're doing here on a small scale, but that we have the research to back up why we're doing it, not just the warm fuzzies from our community, but we also have, the research to back us up as well.
And I like that observation because it really connects even small rural libraries in Iowa and elsewhere to the larger library landscape. So that's a great observation. Before I go on with other resources, I want to come back with to Stacy's question about access to project outcome. Actually, Stacy, I wish the State Library could take credit for project outcome, but it really is not our product. It comes to you from the Public Library Association. So it has been on the scene, oh golly, I'm going to say maybe since 2010, 2012, right in that era, but it's still going strong, and at the State Library we're still anxious to do workshops and classes and webinars on it, and spread the word to libraries that have not yet taken a crack at it, right? But this is really a product of the Public Library Association. All right, this is a very good article also, specific to project outcome. This was shared on the Web Junction website. There you can see the address that will get you there. This was an article contributed by the Loveland, Colorado Public Library about how they've used project outcome. They specifically used the set of surveys that dealt with economic development, and to kind of gauge how Loveland Public Library was doing in terms of its business collection, its business reference service, and all of its online subscription products to their business community. And so in their doing a project outcome survey, I want to read you what this article says. Within a week and a half, Loveland, Colorado had noted 37% of respondents had completed the survey, with many insightful comments. Loveland shares these statistics from their business community survey. 80% of their business clients felt more knowledgeable about what it takes to establish a business. 90% answered they felt more confident in establishing their own business. 95% intended to apply what they learned at the library's business classes, and 85% were now more aware of the library's business resources. Those are amazing numbers. So this you will find on the Web Junction site. This brings us back then to the project outcome site. Remember, this is entirely free to you. It only takes setting up an account, and once you do that, again, you have access to pre-designed surveys that help you get at those very important but often underreported impacts or outcomes of library service. The outcomes you collect should become the stories you tell. So there you go. Before we leave each other, I want to share this commercial message from the State Library. This time it's the EDGE project. Now, this is something that in fact is being brought to you by the State Library of Iowa, entirely free of charge, although it's a national initiative. The EDGE is a technology assessment tool, entirely free for the life of this project. Please let us know if you have questions, if you would like some assistance with this along the way. Frankly, I think if all the libraries in any given county were to get together and have an EDGE assessment party, I think that would be big fun. But then I don't get out much. So there you go. That could be a good collaborative thing to do amongst all the libraries in your county. We're anxious to see really good participation here, because in assessing the level of technology at your library, again, it will give you maybe more compelling stories to tell about the state of your technology, and maybe how to persuade funders that there are some needed technology advancements that need to happen at your library. So this also will generate some pretty cool charts and graphs and reports when you're at the end of the assessment. All right, let us know at the district office, or any of the staff at our Des Moines office can also talk with you more about the EDGE. And this, again, makes a very good board education program if you would like us to, those of us who are district consultants, come to your board meetings and talk with you about this project. All right, and I hope you will all be able to come back again next month. It will be when the topic is Advocacy, Faces, and Places. I will be joined by Zach Smith from the Cherokee Public Library. So I hope you will come back for that discussion. I thank you very much for joining us tonight. And Amanda, thank you for your time in sharing your project outcome experience.